The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety just released their crash test of the Tesla Model Y, and as expected, it achieved the highest available scores in all categories. The IIHS estimates for probability of injury during these tests was even less than that of the Model 3, whose scores famously put Tesla at odds with another testing body, the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, when the automaker began marketing the sedan as the safest vehicle ever tested by them. Though the Model 3 and the Model Y share a majority of individual parts, the unibodies themselves are different, with the Ys incorporating safety lessons learned from the Model 3. By comparing the crash tests of the two models, we can actually see some of the difference with our own eyes. For all comparisons, the Model 3 will be shown on the top or left of split screens, and the Model Y on the bottom or right. The first video clip released by the IIHS is the driver's side small overlap test, which simulates a collision that passes its forces primarily through the front wheel well instead of through the center of the vehicle's crumple zone. Vehicles that perform well on this test use reinforcements towards the rear of the wheel well and the firewall to act as a wedge, redirecting the passenger compartment away from the point of impact instead of trying to absorb the impact through controlled crumpling of the vehicle itself. In the small overlap test, the vehicle impacts a 5-foot-tall rigid barrier at 40 miles per hour with only 25% of its total width. While the Model 3 earned a superior rating on this test, you can see how the Model Y does a better job of moving the entire vehicle away from the point of impact. This means less forces of deceleration are transmitted to the passengers, which then means less of a chance they will be injured. When comparing the wheel well structures of the Model 3 and Y, you can see how the Y's extra height allows for a greater amount of wheel well and firewall reinforcement. You can also see how that reinforcement has a much longer curve in the Y than in the 3, likely contributing to smoother redirection of the passenger compartment around the point of impact shown in the crash test. The Model 3 passenger compartment is still relatively well preserved, though it experienced significantly more deformation in the footwell than that of the Model Y. Technicians measured 21 centimeters of footwell intrusion for the Model 3 compared to only 1 centimeter for the Model Y. The Model 3 dummy also experienced a head injury criterion of 88 versus 22 for that in the Model Y. Both scored well below the 250 mark associated with concussion. The left foot of the Model 3 dummy experienced 60 Gs of forces compared to 22 Gs for that in the Model Y. This is why the Model 3 only scored acceptable for lower leg and foot injury measures, whereas the Model Y was scored as good. This next clip is of the moderate overlap test, which is used by many safety rating agencies. The vehicle strikes a 2-foot-tall deformable honeycomb barrier offset 10% from its center line at 40 miles per hour. Vehicles that do well on this test use design features that spread offset forces through the entire front crumple zone, rather than trying to make do with only half of the zone's protection. Notice how the impact forces fracture the Model 3's windshield, while the Model Y's windshield remains intact. You can also see how much farther the compression stops from the passenger compartment of the Model Y than that of the Model 3. Once again, the taller Model Y front end means a taller crumple zone, providing less transmission of impact forces into the passenger compartment on this test. In this test, injury measures between the two Teslas were very close, with the notable exception once again of head injury criterion. The dummy in the Model 3 experienced an HIC of 177, while the dummy in the Model Y experienced an HIC of 107. Both are still below the concussion standard of 250, which is why the IIHS rates both models as good in all injury measures. The last clip released by the IIHS is of the side impact test. Know that though the IIHS changed the sled in 2021, the Model Y test was performed with the older sled that was used for testing the Model 3. It weighs 3,100 pounds and impacts the vehicle at 31 miles per hour. Just look at how much higher the barrier extends above the dummy's head in the Model 3 than that in the Model Y. This shows why taller seating positions often mean increased protection from injury in T-bone collisions like these. That's probably why the dummy in the Model 3 experienced a head injury criterion of 237, just below the 250 point considered as concussive. The Model Y dummy experienced half that at an HIC of 120. You can also see how the greatest deformation of the B-pillar is above the seat cushions in the Model 3, but below the seat cushions in the Model Y, likely contributing to the Model 3's torso deflection rate of 5.27 meters per second versus the Model Y's 3.91 meters per second. Interestingly enough, enough, the Model 3's rear passenger experienced an HIC of 78, whereas the Model Y's rear passenger experienced an HIC twice that at 146. Both are still below the level considered as risk of concussion. All injury measurements were still rated good by the IIHS for both vehicles. The IIHS didn't release footage of the Model Y's roof crush test, but it was performed similarly to the way it was done on the Model 3 here. This is one area where the shorter roofline of the Model 3 provided much better resistance to deformation than that of the Model Y. In fact, though the IIHS considers a strength to weight ratio above 4.0 as good, the Model Y score of 4.42 underperformed quite a few vehicles in its test class, like the Mustang Mach-E's 6.21 ratio, or the 5.34 ratio of the Volkswagen ID4. Note that all crash tests are simulations that do not account for all of the variables experienced in real-world crashes, nor are all crash types simulated in crash tests. However, performance on these standardized tests correlate well to real-world protection of passengers. Be sure to subscribe if you're interested in seeing more evaluations of crash tests like this. I really appreciate you watching The Tech of Tech, and I hope to see you next time.